problem that we're focusing on today and in my thesis is how the AI race that we're currently in is where a lot of organizations and governments are pushing speed over safety. They're in like a go, go, go mindset where we're going to invest as much as we can into AI without really looking at what the long-term consequences are. A lot of these times, these organizations are adopting AI without really having a clear, responsible, sustainable AI governance strategy. And it is a little bit hard to do it too, because the sustainable risk that does come with AI is multidimensional. It's environmental, economical, and social. And because of those reasons, there's not one singular solution that kind of clears all problems. It has to require like a multi-layered solution. There's many factors and parts that needs to be involved. So for that reason, it is a little bit complicated, but that's what we'll talk about today, how to do it. So a little bit about what AI is. The dictionary definition is machines that can perform tasks associated with human intelligence. There are many different types of AI, but in this paper, we'll focus on like the four main. So machine learning, deep learning, natural language processing, and computer vision. These four types are some of the most powerful AI subsets that we know today and power most of the AI systems that we use, like ChatGPT. So a little bit about the history of AI. While it has been super important and famous right now, it does lead back all the way to 1950. Alan Turing, a researcher, he proposed a Turing test, which tested if the machines he created could do and perform certain things that humans could. Shortly after that, in 1951, we had our first artificial neural network built by Minsky and Edmonds at Princeton University. At 1955, the term AI was officially coined at the Dartmouth workshop. Before that, there was just many different terms like cyber optics or robotics or thinking humans, computers. So we officially had the term AI. And then after this, there was a lot of early successes, which led to the first AI boom. So this was around like 1950s to 1970s. A lot of, governments, countries around the world were pouring tons of money into like research universities, and they predicted that by 1970, AI could do things better than humans could. However, by mid-1970, that promise was not held, and that led to all the hype collapsing and leading to the first AI winter in global history. After that, things were a little bit quiet. People weren't really talking about AI that much, but in 1980s, there were some AI expert systems that started being really successful, and that revived interest again. However, that was pretty short-lived as well, and that led to the second AI winter that society faced. After that, in like the 90s, 2010s, there was just slow and steady progress in machine learning AI. A lot of it was behind the scenes. Big tech was investing in AI, but it wasn't really like advertised or put on the media. It was just slow and steady progress. But because of that slow and steady progress in 2022, it all built up and ChatGPT was launched, triggering the second AI boom, which we're currently in today. It has led to massive global investment. Everyone's talking about it. Everyone's investing in it. But yeah, so 2022 to present day, what we're currently in. Now that we have a good background of AI, let's go and talk about sustainability. So sustainability, there's three folds that we focus on in this paper. There's a lot of aspects to sustainability. The first one is environmental, which most people do associate sustainability with, and that is ensuring that our Earth's ecosystems and nature is not compromised and due to like current technological investment. The second fold is economic, which is ensuring that current investment in advanced technology is not hindering our future economy. And then the last fold is social sustainability, which is focusing and ensuring that our AI systems are not creating harmful biases. They're not creating like harmful human dimensions of wealth and whatnot. But overall, sustainability just ensures that our technological process that we do make in AI does not hinder our well-being currently and in the future. AI and sustainability do have a lot of tensions and synergies. While there's arguments that AI can support sustainability, AI is predicted to be able to do help climate modeling, renewable optimization, better healthcare analysis, agriculture optimization. but AI is also known to be able to threaten sustainability as well. As we've seen in the news, AI uses tons and tons of energy, water, power consumption, releases tons of carbon emissions, releases tons and tons of e-waste, and also can create social harm and economic inequity. Because of this, we do need responsible and sustainable AI to sort of mitigate these risks that happens because of AI. The dictionary definition that we focus on in this paper is that responsible sustainable AI is the practice of developing, deploying, and governing AI systems to minimize risks that negatively impact our environment, society, and economy. Just like AI, it is responsible, sustainable AI. Oh my God, sorry. Responsible and sustainable AI is like a buzzword that people have heard about right now, but it does lead back early on. For example, the Turing test that we talked about earlier, it is testing, AI, if it's doing its job, is it doing the right thing, which I see, in my opinion, is similar to an AI audit. The second thing is the science fiction Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, which is testing and making sure that robotics are not doing anything to harm human safety. Those are the early roots of responsible, sustainable AI, but most of the recent momentum has been recently with, for example, Big Tech's partnership on AI in 2016, which is a coalition of all big tech companies coming together to sort of create and commit to responsible, sustainable AI practices. And after ChatGPT, a lot of like governments and organizations and nonprofits and research labs wanted to get in, and they created a surge of regulatory frameworks between 2022 and current day 2025. Now that we got a good understanding of like the background of AI, sustainability, responsible sustainable AI, now we can talk about the bulk of my paper, which is how do we actually do this? So the first step, or should I say one of the important factors is establishing your mission statement, your vision statement, and your values. A lot of this is overlooked because a lot of people are like, implement, but I think it's important to always have something that sort of leads your agenda for the whole implementation of AI. There's tons and tons of papers and frameworks out there that mention tons of values, but out of the analysis that we did on multiple different frameworks, I found these 8 to be the most common in all of them, such as transparency, security, accountability, fairness, lawfulness, and reliability. Once we do have our values established, it's important that the organization use these to build a foundation of their mission and vision statements, which outline what their goal is from AI and show their commitment to responsible, sustainable AI principles. And all 3 kind of help align all stakeholders in the AI system. So the AI engineers, the management, board of directors, make sure everyone's kind of sort of committed to this progress rather than it being just solely a statement or a few words. The next factor that is important is high quality data. It is known that high quality data equates to high quality AI. So it's important that we build off of high quality data early on so we can avoid the risks later on. The first factor would be data governance policies. Data governance policies are something that outline like who owns the data, how is it cleaned, how is it removed, who owns it, what frameworks are we adhering to. Once we have these policies in state, it's important to implement them throughout the entire data lifecycle, from data creation to data destruction. So for example, in data creation, when companies are getting loads and loads of data, it's important to understand where is this data coming from? Is it clean data? Is it data that is biased? Making sure that it's good from the start. And then data destruction, for example, it's important that we're deleting this data properly. We're not leaving any room for leak or breaches of important personal data. So yeah, it's important we have data governance implemented throughout the entire data life cycle. The next really important thing is security controls. This is also a factor throughout the whole entire data life cycle. Security controls also ensure that they sort of implement the data governance policies. They ensure that our data is not leaked, it's stored properly, it's deleted properly, how it's used in AI, making sure everything's super secure. Our last factor within this is training programs. I think it's really important that the AI engineers are trained on what the data governance policies are and what the responsible sustainable AI policies are, but also training programs for people who are using the AI within the business, who's using the generative AI, who's creating it, who's the business analyst that's strategizing it. So it's important that everyone is, aware of the importance of this. Because I took a class on data and tech governance, and they said all of like sustainability, security problems always happen from people. So it's important that we make sure that they're all trained and good to go. The next important factor is data centers. As we've all seen in the news, we have tons and tons of data centers being built in Arizona, and it's predicted that they will consume tons of energy, electricity, shooting electricity costs all over the valley. So there are a few solutions that we think would be super important for organizations to implement. So the first one being efficiency solutions. So as we mentioned, data centers use a lot of power and they're not necessarily efficient. So some solutions we can implement is model efficiency. For example, making our AI models more efficient. They're not super long and they're not, being redundant, and making sure it's clean from the start so we're not using more data center power than needed. The second and third thing is power capping and distributed UPS. So that is essentially, currently a lot of data centers are running 100% of the time at all parts of the data center. So it's important that, for example, if we're not using power in one area of the data center, we're sort of transferring it to another part and being a little bit more efficient with our power supply architecture. In terms of cooling, right now the most popular cooling for data centers is air cooling. However, it's the least sustainable out of our cooling options. It is common amongst all data center engineers. A lot of people are aware how to do it, but it's not very sustainable. So a lot of people have been looking into liquid cooling, which is way more sustainable and actually ironically uses less water and liquid than air cooling. However, it is very, very expensive, and a lot of hardware and chips and GPUs aren't very, they can't use liquid cooling. They only work with air cooling. So that is a big problem. So while it is sustainable, it's not very practical or effective. So our solution is creating a hybrid approach. So, using the ones that do really, really need air cooling, use air cooling, and then the ones that can use liquid cooling can use liquid cooling. And on top of that, in the near future, I'm sure there's going to be a lot of research and progress in these fields and more better hardware and chips. And a lot of those do require liquid cooling. So a hybrid approach makes sure we're adaptable, but also being able to use what we currently have. The next thing is energy solutions. A lot of thing that's been trending right now is renewable power with batteries like our solar and wind renewables. However, there's a saying on a lot of research papers that the sun's not always up and wind's not always blowing. So it isn't super practical. So a lot of people's other options is nuclear co-location, which is known to be extremely sustainable. However, similar to liquid cooling, it's not very practical and there's a limited amount of it. So that's another problem, but both are good options. The last thing that a lot of people don't talk about, but is actually e-waste solutions. So a lot of these times, these data centers are using data center racks, hardware, chips, that once they go bad, they tend up being in landfills with every other sort of thing that are in the landfill, contaminating everything else. Or what we've seen in the past is a lot of companies will dump their e-waste in third world countries, sort of promoting it as creating this recycling program, but instead it's being harmful to the communities over there. So some things that we could do, there's not a lot of research in this space, but some things that we saw that are important for companies and data centers to use is data sanitization. So making sure first that when we are disposing of e-waste, we're not disposing it with any important data. The second thing is that a lot of these hardware companies should implement take-back programs. So for example, when you're done using your iPhone, Apple has this thing where you can give them your phone and they refurbish it, or they can kind of reuse some of those chips in there. So something like that. The third thing is materials recovery. A lot of these chips use very rare earth materials. They're not you can't really destroy them completely. They are reusable. So I think their company should definitely look into that. The fourth thing is not very well researched. It's pretty new, but it's incineration. So when we're getting rid of these chips, a lot of times we're burning them. One thing that people have looked into is when they're burning the chips, they're using that heat as energy for the data centers. So it's like a little like cycle, like everything's being reused. And another thing is government e-landfills. So like we mentioned earlier, a lot of times these chips are just in normal landfills, contaminating everything there. So instead we could have government e-landfills, which are solely for the purpose of e-waste. Another key aspect is responsible AI frameworks and legislation. It is generally thought that one framework is the solution for all problems in responsible, sustainable AI, but what we saw is that a good strategy would require different frameworks for different parts and teams and phases of the AI system lifecycle. So for example, we could use some more general level frameworks, which are a little bit more general. They list some of our values, what our goals are, what our intentions are. And then we could have some more specific frameworks, which are more aligned with specific parts of the AI lifecycle. So like deployment, when we're making changes, who's auditing it. But altogether, it's important that when we are implementing these frameworks, we are conducting regular audits. These should be conducted internally, but also by third parties instead, as well. And then it's important, like we said, that frameworks are used throughout the entire AI lifecycle. A lot of times companies, will implement it as like at the beginning, but sort of forget about it later on. So it's important that we have like these audits and key metrics which ensure that we're adhering to these frameworks, but we're also not forgetting about it later on. Frameworks are important, but legislation is just as important as well. Currently, we'll talk about like what the legislative landscape looks like around the world. So in the US, we have no comprehensive federal law. We have just a patchwork of laws. So like we have a law in California, Colorado, Utah. Currently there's a lot of federal debate over what AI oversight should look like in the states. And currently we don't have like a comprehensive federal law, but we do have an American AI Action Plan, which is promoting acceleration AI rather than regulation. In the European Union, we have the complete opposite. We do have legislation that, the European Union government is not afraid to fine big tech if they are doing something wrong with their data, but we have the EU AI Act and we have the General Data Protection Regulation. In China, we see a more hybrid approach. They have regulation like the algorithmic recommendation regulation, data security law, personal information protection law, but we also have an AI action plan as well. There, the government sees that there should be a very strong part in the AI sort of landscape in China. They've been playing a role as a policymaker, passing all these laws and action plans, being an investor within AI in their companies and research, being a supplier of like chips and hardware, but also being a customer themselves and using those AI that their companies are producing. But this legislation is not enough. We definitely do need some more to make sure that people are adhering to responsible, sustainable AI principles. A lot of these times, these current laws that are in place are not very clear and specific and leave a lot of room for interpretation, which can be a little bit, dragging on when someone has a question and they have to go through court and all that stuff, and it's not very efficient. So the regulation should be clear and specific. It should encourage innovation. AI is here to stay, but we don't want to hinder innovation, but we also don't want to leave, innovation that is not regulated and just free-flowing and leaving lots of room for long-term consequences. So it should be a good balance between innovation and regulation. It's important that regulation should address underlying data and platforms. As we've seen, AI is constantly changing. Every second, it is getting new data that is trained on. It's constantly changing. So it's important that instead of maybe regulating the AI itself, because it's constantly changing, that means their laws would have to be constantly changing every second. So maybe it's a little bit better idea where we address these underlying data and platforms, because that's a little bit more easier since platforms are a little bit more like they don't change that often. The fourth thing would be industry-specific laws. A lot of AI use cases are completely different in the aviation industry rather than healthcare. And having one general law for AI doesn't really work when you have different use cases for every single industry. So one thing that has been researched is, for example, in the government, we have different committees. We have like a healthcare committee, we have like an agriculture committee, we have an aviation committee. So maybe having one or two experts on each committee who are like aware and knowledgeable on AI concepts and are able to like sort of create these industry specific laws. Another thing that has been researched but not implemented quite yet around the globe is federal audits. A lot of times we have audits in financial statements. We have audits in aviation, making sure our planes are secure. We have them in healthcare. So the argument is, why not for technology as well? But yeah, hasn't happened yet, but a good idea. But yeah, overall, the key takeaways and conclusion to this presentation is that responsible, sustainable AI, there's no one singular solution like we saw. There's multiple different aspects, multiple different parts that we need to implement, and just all are just as important. AI should support all three: environmental, social, and economic sustainability. All three are just important as one or the other, so it's important that all three are factored in. And last but not least, responsible, sustainable AI is an ongoing commitment. It is not a one-time implementation where it's one and done and you can forget about it later on. It needs to be something that's constantly glued in people's minds. When people think of AI, they should not just think about AI like ChatGPT, investment, getting a short-term return. They should also look at the long-term consequences and keep in mind that responsibility and sustainability are just as important. But yeah, any questions?
Awesome. So let's give you a round of applause first. And we'll open it up first to the people in the room as well as on Zoom. Any questions?
I was wondering if you could expand on the solution that you were talking about, the government e-waste landfills, about how that would prevent there being as much waste, I guess.
So the waste, like there will be the same amount of waste. That's obviously like a consequence of AI and data centers. But our research is showing that instead of having like the e-waste with all general like waste or day-to-day garbage, a lot of these times these chips have a lot of like rare earth materials, which are a little bit like they can contaminate other things and create a lot of pollution, and like chemicals can be spread. So our idea is maybe we should separate the two. We should have something designated for e-waste so we don't have things contaminating the rest. Like for example, like let's say we have super general example, but like we have our e-waste like chips and we have it right by like a plastic container, like in hopes the plastic container is going to be used for something else. But now that the e-waste is there, we can't necessarily use it because it's not safe for like use and water in. So it's good to just separate the two to like make sure there's not a lot of like cross spread and contamination and stuff. Yeah. There's more on the paper.
And lots of problems with the recycling system as well as kind of a first layer that if we fix that, right, that they're related solutions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Questions?
Are there any signals that things like quantum computing is going to kind of help with this sustainability issue as we kind of move forward with our data chips?
A lot of it is, that's a lot of things that we talk about in the paper. So like, as we've seen with like China, like their DeepSeek, a lot of like their like chips have been super sustainable, able to do like way more in one chip than a chip that ChatGPT uses. So it definitely would be super great if quantum computing and chips see a lot of progress. And I do think that in the future we'll eventually get there. I think it will be a good thing if things can run more efficiently and use way less energy and data center power than it does today.
I'd be curious to hear if kind of what was like most surprising or unexpected about the research that you did along the way. Was there anything that kind of stands out that you didn't expect to think?
A lot of it, I did know that data centers were pretty unsustainable, but once I saw this one research statistic, it was saying how in like the next few years, they predict that the data centers in the United States, I believe, will like use as much power as the entire country of Japan. And that's kind of like overwhelming that like just data centers in the US, not even accounting for like anything else, is the same as a huge country across the globe. So that was pretty shocking, but also how difficult it is to do responsible sustainable AI. Like it is like pretty multifaceted. There's a lot of parts to it. And another thing that was shocking is also how there's a lot of benefits for AI sustainability. So I think the problem is right now, like how do we like balance the like how it's going to help sustainability, but how it's also going to hurt it. And a lot of it is that like there's not a lot of like metrics out there which can measure AI being sustainable. So it's hard to even measure as well, which is why we use frameworks. But yeah.
So I felt like this was an unfair question, but you've kind of invited it, I think, so I'm gonna ask it anyway. But I think it is probably unfair. But when you were talking about sustainability in that presentation, which was a great presentation, it just crossed my mind this doesn't sound like sustainability at all. This sounds like mitigating really serious environmental and other effects.
Yeah.
Do you think did you ever think, oh, we should just say, let's pause, let's not do AI until we can do it sustainably?
There is, like, I do think there should be some pause to it, but the way, like, a lot of governments are investing, like, tons of money, I do think it's not gonna be paused because people have already invested, like, millions in it. Like, I think there should be some pause because I think it's going too fast, and a lot of the problem is that AI is moving much faster than legislation and solutions are accelerating. So it's like acceleration, like by the time AI is over here, like the solutions are all the way back here. So I think there should be some pause to it, but realistically, the way like people are like investing in it and the way big tech and governments are all in it together, I don't think there will be a pause anytime soon, but I think there definitely should be some sort of like, I don't think they should invest nearly as much as they are right now without, I think like, for example, in the timeline, we saw one thing I did notice is how like whenever there was a boom, it always like followed by a winter. But in 2010s, like in 2022, we saw like the best like success we've seen in AI so far. And what I noticed is that like all of that success came after there was gradual progress. So in 2010s, early 90s, we saw that there was slow but steady progress. People weren't like pulling billions of dollars into it. They weren't creating all this crazy hype. It was pretty behind the scenes. And I think that when we do have slow and steady progress and we take a step back a bit, that's when we see good results. I think there should be a pause to it, but you know, obviously it's not super realistic, but I think we should have slow and steady progress rather than like just jumping right into it without really thinking of the long-term consequences. I don't know if that really necessarily answered your question, but
And just to think about, are we too far gone for a pause?
I have a related, and I think we have one online actually, yeah, but I'll do related really quick because I think something that the paper does really well and your presentation did really well is address the urgency, like the urgent need for these kinds of solutions. I wonder if you could point to what are the most important conversations that need to happen today. What would you, if you were a consultant for a company, what are the most important conversations that need to happen for companies today?
I think definitely legislation. I think we can't really rely on companies that are super focused on their return on investment rather than general sustainable good. I don't think we should leave them to self-govern. I think we should have some sort of legislation and people that are experts on this field sort of auditing and regulating AI. I think that's the most important because while it's important that, you know, it's good that companies are like creating their values and their mission vision statement, but a lot of these times companies are just doing it to show the greater good on their, you know, their quarter one reports. And they don't necessarily implement it, but when we have legislation, they have no choice. So with legislation would be important, and then also audits as well. I think that makes sure that they're, like adhering to it. But there is one issue. So I did see in one research paper that I read that the EU has really strict like policies, and they fine millions of dollars to like Meta for doing a data breach. But that millions of dollars is just so insignificant to Meta that they just pay it off. and keep doing it because they see more return on creating AI from their data and doing those data breach, like, not doing it the best ethical way than just paying a few millions. So I think strict regulation, but also audits as well, because a lot of the times that companies, when they have so much money and so many people investing in them, that few millions are like, that's nothing. So I think audits to make sure that they're actually adhering to it, but legislation, because I think we're like, there's some time, now that AI is so big, I think like we have regulation in everything, why not AI? But yeah.
Good quote, good quote.
That's great.
Thank you.
That's great.
There's
Yeah, we'll go online.
two from online. Do you think that the environmental impact of AI online use is adequately understood by the general public?
Not necessarily. So I feel like most people do have like, oh, okay, AI is not very good for our environment, but I wouldn't blame them necessarily, like them being like, oh, they don't know enough. I think it's just really hard to measure. Like I think I noted earlier, like environmental, like sustainable metrics, it's very hard to measure like what exactly like the AI sustainability solution is actually doing. It's not very easy to measure, so it's not very easy to understand as well. But I think letting like the general public know the harms of AI is, some good than no good. I think it's good that people are being aware. Like for example, I think it was Indiana, but a few days ago, Google was trying to build an Indiana data center there, and they, said that it was going to do a lot of things for the community, create lots of jobs, but people who were aware of the harms that were going to come with it in the long term, protested, they shut it down, and now there is no more data center in Indiana. So I think people, they are definitely being aware of it right now, but I think they should definitely be more aware about like what the harms are and making sure it's not harming their own communities. But yeah, hopefully that answered it.
Kind of a follow-up maybe to that. What do you think could be the impact of a heavy education campaign could have on the for entertainment consumers of AI?
I think it would be like pretty beneficial to have an education program where people are being a little bit more aware of like the consequences of AI. I think, yeah, people should definitely be more aware of like what the consequences of AI are. I think it just would be, I think it would be up to like research, like not research institutions, but like university institutions to push that sort of concept. It would have to be something that the media shows, because a lot of times like Wall Street will be like, AI is gonna like create so much for the economy. So I think it's like it's in the paper, but like AI, like responsible sustainable AI, it's like something that a lot of people need to join hands on. It's not just like big tech, government needs to play a role, media, researchers. So I think a good education program will be helpful. But obviously not everyone has an access to like education at a university. So probably something on the media too to sort of show the harms are, because a lot of it is just showing the good without showing the bad. I don't know if that answered the question either, but hopefully it did.
In doing your research, did you come across a particular company that's involved with AI that you think is doing the best at this of the companies doing AI?
I feel like
They're all pretty bad.
I think like honestly like I like don't necessarily blame them, because a lot of them have so many investors who are like, if they do like they don't do the right thing for their investors' investment, then they get so much backlash. So I think a lot of companies are doing the right thing by, showing some sort of commitment to it. I know I understand it's not very easy to do, but they do have lots of money. So they should be investing in responsible, sustainable AI research as well. But I think a lot of what I've seen done well is in China. I think when they released DeepSeek, which showed that they cut the amount of energy that ChatGPT used by like so much. And I think that showed a lot of the Western world that it is possible. I think a lot of people's excuse was it's not possible, that we kind of just have to compromise some of our sustainability concerns for the greater good and the greater benefit that AI will produce. So I think a lot of what I've seen well is in China with like DeepSeek, but I think it's also because they have a lot of investment and legislation for that. So I think if we do have a little bit more government intervention, then we'll also see that in companies in the US. But yeah.
I think you have one more question.
I have so many, but I'm just gonna pick one, and it's that, do you think, kind of playing off the idea of are we too far gone to pause or anything? I don't necessarily, do you think that an AI winter is possible at this point? Or do you think that we are barreling, right now, we're just in this peak period of exponential growth, and we're just barreling to maybe not necessarily a collapse in a winter, but like a leveling off point where we've just kind of accepted. And like, at what point is it going to, when are we going to reach the point where like, there's nothing more we can put into it, right? Like, what does that kind of look like? What is the next kind of phase, whether you call it a winter or leveling off or whatever? What do you think that could look like?
I don't think necessarily we'll have like an extreme AI winter, which shuts off AI. I think we are too far gone, but I think we'll eventually see that some of the hype that it's created will not be like implemented in the near future. Like, for example, a lot of like Wall Street was super shocked the past few days when Nvidia's like earnings were released and they didn't see some of the promise that they were promised early on. So I think that's showing that a lot of times, I think it's important that organizations and companies don't create like sort of these like, I think it's good to have goals because like, you know, that's what we're striving for, but like not making them super like unrealistic that it creates that they're just trying to get so much investment and get tons of money by creating this like hype surrounding what they're trying to do, that in the end they don't really live up to the promise and then don't really like don't have any greater benefit in the long term. But yeah, I don't think we'll necessarily have like an AI winter. I think like this time it's been like pretty significant with what AI has shown, and honestly, a lot of companies have like invested tons of money, and a lot of it has been pretty great. Like we saw at MIT, they released this like AI that's able to like scan like cancer detections like way better than they've seen in the future. And I think some of those things are great. But I think it's important that we don't like, you know, create this goal just to get investment from people, just to get like, crazy like financial statements and stuff. I saw a podcast, they were saying how like a lot of people were comparing like the next AI winter like to the dot-com bubble that was in the 90s. And their argument was that the dot-com bubble, the thing was, is a lot of people created a lot of hype around it. And the way to stop that from happening with AI is just by creating like false promises and just doing things for a short term. I think in terms of AI, since it's pretty significant and is pretty altering to our sustainability like goals, it should be thought of as very like keeping the long-term consequences in mind. That was a little bit of a random, but okay.
Oh yeah, so kind of following this AI hype, a lot of the opportunities available to people interested in computer science research kind of try to sneak AI, deep learning, machine learning into like everything that they possibly can. So I'm just wondering, what would your advice be to someone who is interested in computer science research on staying in touch with these values of responsibility and sustainability?
Yeah, I think it's definitely important that whenever people are working with AI, learning about it, that responsible, sustainable AI is synonymous with it. I think when you're creating these like systems or researching these AI systems, I think it's important that you don't just leave the values at the beginning and your frameworks. You sort of implement it along the way. And I think that way that's possible is through trainings. Like, for example, if you're a researcher that ASU is hired on like learning AI and researching AI, they should be trained on what the importance is of responsible and like sustainable AI is. And I think a lot of times it's just training and people being constantly made aware of like the importance of it. But yeah.
And I'll say one thing just to add to that is that in ASU's design aspirations, we've added principled innovation as an overarching theme that helps guide our university. And I know that looks different across multiple parts of the university. There's a lot going on here in the Lincoln Center for Applied Ethics related to that, a lot going on where I am in engineering and across the university, but being able to really ask the question of just because we can technologically do something, should we be doing it? So I think the more we can ask those questions, but yeah, valid point of where we're not typically, that's not the first thing we're typically doing, especially in the space of computer science.
Yeah, I'd like to add, to address the question, I think the engineer's job is going to evolve for the future AI jobs as well, because right now the engineering job is to design and code the AI, but the future jobs are going to be, doing the coding with the ethics.
Absolutely,
So-
absolutely.
So that's what I think, like if the engineer can work with understand what the ethics compromises are and can include the ethics in the coding, that will make them more sustainable for the future jobs. Well, I can see where you're coming from, because a lot of engineers are worried that if AI is doing all the coding, if the old engineering job is going to be sustainable or not, right?
Yeah. Lots of things that remind us about the humans, right?
Yes.
We are the humans
Yes.
involved.
I have a question about how to go about doing the social part. For instance, I think it was on 60 Minutes, they talked about an AI company that had hired a philosopher to try to teach the AI system ethics and morals. But did you hear any other examples of how they're trying to achieve that social aspect?
So a lot of the social aspect is like, harmful biases that are, not like biased towards one group over the other. And I think that definitely starts off with good data, making sure our data is not biased, our data is pretty equitable, equal, is pretty balanced overall. So I think that would be a good thing for social sustainability. Another thing would be is a lot of the times AI is creating like this super widening wealth disparity. A lot of the pool of money is within these large companies, sort of creating like a pretty big gap between big companies and the average human. And I think a solution for that would just be legislation, making sure that things are capped. We're not letting these big tech giants control everything about AI. So I think that also leads back to data, making sure they're not owning all this data of their own, and the government's having some leverage to it, or humans as well. Like actually all the data there.
Do you see anything outside of government regulation that would incentivize companies to build in sustainability into their AI systems?
I think a lot of it would come with the people themselves. So people being educated on what the harms are. For example, when we saw that Indiana Google data center shutdown, it's pretty cool that a lot of the times that they're masking the data centers, creating jobs and having so much cool things, but then when people are actually aware, they shut it down. So I think the power lies in the people. If people are aware, then they'll be able to, stop some of these harmful things. But yeah, I think legislation, making it required, and then people themselves, because they don't have any people using your stuff, they have no business.
Yeah, I think there's a thing about rapid development causes, right, us to think that we've gone past the point of no return. But I think your researcher paper, we haven't actually. There is power. The people have power. That's a great question.
Jordan, do we have a question online?
Yeah. She came in late, I think, but what type of legislation do you think needs to be implemented for AI to become more sustainable?
I definitely think AI regulation that is pretty specific, not general. A lot of times the AI law that people are putting in place is just to have one there. And it doesn't really necessarily do a job because it's not really regulating anything about AI. A lot of it leads to interpretation. So companies and organizations can kind of do their own thing and just justify, find some loophole. So I think it's important that we make laws for AI that are pretty specific, but also making sure that the people that are making these laws are knowledgeable. So pretty cross-disciplinary. So we have AI researchers, we have lawyers, philosophers, engineers, everyone who creates some sort of law that's actually practical, because obviously we want it to be effective, but should be practical as well for people to implement. But yeah.
I'm having this thought that's kind of crossing a lot of the words that I saw in your presentation, like transparency as part of the mission and vision. And maybe it touches on social sustainability and a little bit possibly on the idea of education as well. But then back to ultimately legislation. What are your thoughts on legislation that requires companies to be forward-facing with their consumers about how AI is put into their products, because a lot of times we have these products now that we've been using, I'm thinking like Microsoft, I'm thinking Canva, Airtable, all these things that suddenly have these AI components in them. I'm thinking about like, you know, LinkedIn just came out and said like 3 weeks ago, by default, we're gonna train our AI on your data and you have to go turn it off. Like what is your take on the responsibility that the companies have to the sustainability, but then also to the people who ultimately use their products, which is not necessarily the same as the identities of the people whose data these laws are protecting. Those aren't necessarily the same groups of people.
Yeah, I think that all comes back to good legislation and people being aware. So for example, a lot of times, like, you know, back in the day when I didn't really know what technology was and stuff, I'd just be like opt in, like accept cookies. I don't really know. Like I'll just accept it. And I think a lot of time that still happens today, where a lot of times you just click accept because you're like, I'll just do it. Like, and people aren't really aware of what that consequence is. So I think people being more aware of what they're getting themselves into. And then I think, you know, legislation would help, people being aware, but then also a lot of times companies are, like you said, intertwining and interweaving AI without people knowing. And I think that is pretty harmful. So I think that's where that transparency aspect comes in, where they're, you know, if they're committing to building the greater good of AI, they're committing to transparency as well and making sure that they're not sort of tricking people into using AI. So yeah, transparency. But I think it all comes down to another like multifaceted thing, like people, governments, but also the organizations themselves. I don't think it'll come from like one or the other. I think everyone sort of has to come together.
Well, and it also probably means that like education has to start way sooner than university level, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think like we've seen that in some of like the more like progressive education systems where people are like starting to teach, like I think I saw something how like in elementary school they're teaching people about like how to code and AI and stuff. And I think like just like the way people are pushing AI and coding, they should push these principles as well. So I think it should just be synonymous. But yeah, that ultimately comes down a lot of it to government as well. Like, what are the government funding? Because, you know, we've seen if, you know, if they don't like what you're teaching, they'll shut down funding. So it's important to like all these back to like legislation. But yeah.
Great, we have time for one last question.
Okay, we talk a lot about education and awareness, right? And I absolutely believe that's something we need to make any progress on this type of issue. But there's unfortunately also just people who simply the long-term consequences don't really like register to them, especially if they have a lot to gain from the AI boom. So do you think that education about the potential harms of AI should also encompass, for example, political education on the mechanisms of surveillance capitalism?
I think the education should be pretty balanced. I think like while we are teaching like how AI can help us in tons of different great things, I think it's also important to just be transparent and to say what are some of the harms are for AI. And my thing is if we teach some of like these kids that are like what the like harms of AI, they'll be like motivated to, you know, sort of, you know, solve these harms. Like for example, in the Eastern world, in China, a lot of times they're really just as much as investment they're putting in AI, they're putting just as much investment into chips that are more sustainable. So I think that we should have like a twofold approach. Like we're like investing in AI, but we're synonymously investing in responsible, sustainable AI as well. And I think a lot of it does come with because a lot of political people like they have different agendas. Like for example, we've seen like right now in America, we're trying to like pull back any sort of oversight or legislation to just keep pushing AI. And I think that there should be some, but that ultimately comes with like a balanced like political agenda, which is pretty hard to achieve. But that ultimately comes down to people understanding what the harms of AI so they can elect people and within the government who will promote some of these values that they care about for AI.
So thank you everyone for your questions. Let's give another round of applause. We will end Zoom here, and Liz and I will step outside to confer, and we'll be back in shortly.